Those that'll be kind of overviewing the context of this evening are who you see on the screen. And I will turn it over to Mark to get us started.
All right. Well, thank you, Brett. Good evening, everybody. I just have a few comments I'd like to make here and certainly appreciate everybody's time. And thank you very much for engaging us in this discussion. This is pretty important to the city. So just stepping back a little bit here, at the end of 2019, the City Council, of course, adopted the first comprehensive plan for the city. We had a retreat in early February of this year, and we had set as the number one priority is this ULUC, and so the Unified Land Use Code. And this has been a top priority for this city for quite some time, and so we were ready to take the next big step. Well, of course, everybody knows then COVID-19 kind of steps into our lives and disrupts everything. And it's certainly been a very difficult impact on us personally, our families, and certainly the city. We've had to step back in probably the March, April, May timeline and make some assessment about where we're at financially and whether or not the city was in a position to advance the priorities here of this organization in our community. So we've struggled through many months. We are certainly have taken a big impact, a financial impact to this organization, and but we've been working through that. We've made a series of changes, and no doubt the community has watched that over time. We're not done, obviously. We have several months of managing COVID-19 and this pandemic, but here we are this evening. And the council has reinforced the importance of the ULUC as the number one priority in our community. And so we have had to kind of make a change in our approach. We were obviously all hoping to have a face-to-face conversation over time. We were pretty excited about all that, but here we are. We've had to kind of modify and had to basically protect ourselves here, both personally and as an organization here, our health and safety. And so we've modified our approach. And I deeply appreciate, and I'm really sincere about this, each of you for engaging in this process. This has been difficult. Many of us were learning the technology here in the early months. No doubt we've become much more proficient about that, but the challenge is still with us here in trying to engage our community and manage the ULUC. As I said, we do have economic challenges that we're going to be looking at here probably for the next several months. Right now, we do see the ULUC is on track, and I'm pretty excited here to kind of step into this next building block and our corridor discussion. And so again, thank you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Brett and Kathleen.
Hey, Kathleen?
I have to unmute myself. So good evening, everyone, and thanks, or I guess it's still technically afternoon, although this time change definitely makes it feel way more like evening. I just want to welcome everyone and echo the words of our city manager, Mark Ralph, and in great appreciation for everyone to join us this evening, but also to be such active participants throughout this entire process. As you know, Envision Littleton kicked off in 2018, so more than 2 years ago now. And the first step was to really get that clear, unifying vision for the city, and begin to take that vision, further expand upon that with a citywide approach through our comprehensive plan that was adopted last year. And then the most important work that we're doing behind the scenes is making sure that based on those goals that the community gave us, the policy direction that council has given us, the action steps that are outlined for staff to take, really do align those resources that we have and feel more and more limited with some of the challenges that COVID presents. This is a top priority for the city to complete the Unified Land Use Code. I'm very pleased this evening to say that we are on schedule. It's a very ambitious schedule. Most cities would take roughly 2.5 years to go through this work. And what we've sketched out is an 18-month process to engage you in the hard work of readdressing our Unified land use code and updating our land use and zoning codes that date back to 1976. The policy guidance that we have from the comprehensive plan becomes sort of our guiding force and North Star as we go through this process. We've tackled some changes with our current land use and zoning code through some amendments to Title 10, and we've done that step as an interim step. And now we work and push forward to present a full unified land use code for the city on June 7th, 2021. So we are very much in an aggressive timeline, but feeling good about how we're on schedule. And I have to say that it is in large part to the dedication that you've shown, both to this work and to committing the time and energy and passion that we've come to really appreciate and know as part of the community experience in Littleton. So with that, I'll get us underway and turn it back over to Brett.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. So the purpose of this evening, and for those of you that participated in earlier Envision Studios, we want to come to the community first. So we have not written word one or really gotten into much analysis of the primary corridors in the community because we want to hear from you first as what your perspectives and thoughts and priorities are. So as we go about starting to draft regulations, we have that in mind. And we make sure that we're utilizing the comp plan and the other studies and plans and visions that have been developed by the community, and particularly taking the words that we hear tonight and throughout this process to help us frame the issues and craft the regulations custom crafted to meet your expectations as the community. This is intended to be a conversation tonight. So we'll be having facilitators. We're going to have breakout sessions so that we can drill down a little deeper into some of the conversations. So we really encourage and invite you to share your thoughts and ideas. We're going to be recording those and making note of those as we work through the process. So the real point here is to start identifying what some of the guiding principles are relative to developing along the primary corridors with whatever land uses that might be that you see being appropriate. And we always want to keep in mind the economics, as both Mark and Kathleen identified. A challenging economic time that none of us anticipated. So that is certainly a vital element of this, to make sure that we are providing for the fiscal health of the community overall as to how we build out these corridors and the types of uses and what they contribute to the tax base ultimately. So this is kind of a revolving or rotating process of going through each of these building blocks. As many of you know, we completed the phase 2 amendments for downtown. We're now working on, we have 3 building blocks that are coming up. We're working on the corridor mixed use building block. But it'll be this process of going through an Envision Studio, learning everything we can about the community and the work that's been done before, starting to frame up ideas, and then coming back to you and seeing if the path we're on is consistent with where you would like us to go. And so we'll do a follow-up Envision Studio and work our way through this 2 more times through the other building blocks until we have a full draft ULUC assembled. So it's just a little bit more about that process for each building block. We're kind of repeating that and building this in an iterative manner so that we can work with you and really dive into some of the deep issues on each of these specific physical components of the city and its ultimate development. So this just kind of gives you a snapshot of our time frame. Right now, we're working on the building block number 2, which began in October and will take us through January. So that focuses on corridors and all the components of development: landscaping, signage, land uses, parking, building types, design, site design. And we'll also at the same time be drafting some other standards such as the subdivision standards and provisions for nonconformity. So with each building block, we'll be starting to assemble some of the other pieces that go with it. And then from February through April, we'll be focusing on neighborhoods, and I'll show you these areas in a moment. And then April through May on the business and commercial areas before we're starting to pull together. So we talk about mixed use development, and I think people generally have an idea of what that means. We wanted to provide some information here, just so you understand it a little bit better relative to your corridors. You have some of this along your corridors. You certainly have this in downtown right now, but it's basically a combination of different uses, different types of residential, commercial, office, institutional land uses that can be designed and integrated together into an individual site. So they're physically and functionally integrated. There's this philosophy that's been in the planning community for a long time about growing smart. And if you look at those that are in the box on the right-hand side, it's all the things that have come up through the comprehensive plan process, everything that we've talked about to date. And these certainly apply directly to developing in the corridors. Mixing land uses, compact building design, providing a range of housing types so we can meet the different people within the community and their needs to make development more walkable. So all these things are important. And as I said, part of what we're going to be examining and looking at as we start building out the regulations for these corridors. Just to give you a little more, some illustration about what some of these things look like. On the right-hand side, you see the bottom image, horizontal mixed use. So in some cases, we have larger sites, and they have mixing of uses, such as multifamily on one part of the site and commercial retail or office on another part of the site. That exists in Littleton today. In the upper left on the right-hand side of the screen is vertical mixed use. This primarily you're seeing in downtown, where you're stacking different uses. So you might have retail on the first floor, and upper floor office or residential. The idea here is to find out ways that we can better utilize the sites that we have in the community and provide more economic opportunity for these property owners as well as for the community of looking at ways that we might be able to infill development or to redevelopment on some particular sites. The four images that are on the left just show kind of different ways that this can be mixed and matched, whether you have like townhome units with an office end cap, like along a corridor, or perhaps a retail end cap. So one of those units would be either office or retail. And you can mix and match those uses. In some cases, you might have live work units on the lower right, where you can have, you know, an office or some type of specialty retail on the first floor. You can live above, and then an end cap might be retail. So it kind of shows you the different ways that buildings can be arranged and all create mixed use. We can accommodate different housing types. You've got quite a span of housing types across the community today. This creates an opportunity to provide for increased housing for the community to help meet the projected population of the community, but thinking creatively about how can these housing types be integrated into some of these mixed-use developments, providing for different formats, different living options and arrangements that can meet the needs of everybody across this community. In some cases, there might be, you know, office and retail buildings. They could be low rise. In some cases, if they're away from residential, they could be mid-rise where appropriate. This has first floor retail and upper floor office. We can think also about how we orient buildings on the site. So this is a commercial center that instead of being set to the back of the site with parking in front, they brought the building to the front, created a very nice streetscape with lawn areas. They have some limited parking up front, but create a very attractive environment. And again, you have some of these in the community as well. And then one of the important parts of this is also creating spaces for people. If we're talking about more compact development, more intense development on some sites, giving spaces for people to gather. If people live there, they want places to recreate or to hang out. They might want to have these outside of a coffee shop or bookstore or something of that nature. So thinking about how these are integrated into development. Now these are the different building blocks. So this is the base map, and the downtown area is shown in the blue there within the football. The next area after this that we're going to be tackling is going to be all the neighborhoods. So all the residential areas, whether they're single family or multifamily or attached, that will be after this building block. We'll be looking at neighborhoods. The very last area that we'll be looking at will be kind of the remaining business and industrial or business park, office park areas. And the area that we are looking at tonight are those areas along all the corridors that were identified for this land use within the comprehensive plan, the land use and character plan. And so we're going to be asking you to really focus on these areas that were shown in blue or purple on this map. Up and down Santa Fe, across Bellevue, across Littleton, down Broadway. Basically the highest trafficked and highest visibility corridors in the community, and those that are primarily devoted mostly to office, retail, non-residential. There are some residential uses along these corridors. This is the image from the future land use and character plan out of the comprehensive plan. This is the guidance that we're utilizing. This spells out the types of land use and the intended character of development. The areas we're talking about tonight are shown for the commercial mixed use. And then zoning is the mechanism to put those in play, to write the actual regulations, to help the community achieve the type of appearance and design and outcomes that you want in the future for these different corridors. This is text pulled from the comprehensive plan. These areas are principally designated for commercial retail, office, and service uses. It applies along these high-profile corridors where we have good access, good visibility, a lot of potential for market products and goods, and for the most part that are apart from neighborhoods. So there's not a lot of conflict with residential areas. There are some locations that will have greater sensitivity than others. Along these corridors, we could have some standalone single-use sites like you have now, a restaurant or an automotive repair shop or something like that that's a single use on a single site. In other cases, we might have mixed-use centers like you see as like strip shopping centers or something like that, but perhaps in a different format. Or we could have mixed-use developments that we'll talk about here a little bit more. The overall destination for this area is intended to be a mixture of uses that have quality amenities and a quality design. And then the characteristics that are outlined in the comprehensive plan here as well. Introducing transit where applicable and thinking about how land use and transportation interact with one another and how land use contributes to transportation and vice versa. Thinking about biking and walking as modes of transportation and how these areas interface with the river and the trails and green spaces. These are some of the goals and policies. They really reinforce everything that we're talking about here. The fiscal sustainability, thinking about land use, transportation, the quality of the environment. Revenue generating uses are going to be important for the future fiscal health of the community. And of course, preserving quality assets and values that you have today. So this is the current zoning. Essentially, every zoning district that you have in town is located somewhere along these corridors. And so therefore, you can understand why you have a mix of different uses. You have, manufactured homes along some uses. You have auto-related uses, retail, office. We even have some industrially zoned land along these corridors. So we'll be looking at the opportunities for those. Some of those may transition over time. And so if they do, what would we want them to be and how would they look? How do they contribute to the character of our community and the first impression that people have when they drive through our corridors? You have a lot of areas that are planned development. Some of you may be familiar with that. They basically require a separate plan and they get into a lot of the details of design. In the cases those have been applied, you do have some attractive site designs. What we're hoping for is to be able to accomplish those without that extra zoning mechanism or that extra step so that people can go with straight zoning and proceed more readily and without any additional red tape necessary. The B2 and B3 are a lot of the areas along here, your retail, personal services. There are some limited industrial uses that are permitted as well. They do have some open space standards, but otherwise there's a lot of the residential districts and even some of the industrial districts that are in this corridor. So this is the zoning map on the right-hand side. We have the Bellevue Avenue vision that was work that was done before. Everything that vision document stresses is exactly what we're talking about this evening. For those of you that may have been involved or be familiar with this, really looking at enhanced building and site design, thinking about how buildings relate to the street frontage and transit and the pedestrian, how we access sites, get into and out of, and making sure that we're doing that safely and in an efficient manner for traffic movement, and thinking about how they're compatible with adjacent neighborhoods. So all the things, this really is kind of a mini code, if you will, for this area that stresses a lot of the things that we talk about tonight. Littleton Boulevard, again, a lot of the same things: minimizing curb cuts, activating buildings along the street frontage, preserving healthy existing trees and vegetation, thinking about areas for pedestrians and visitors with interior courtyards and plazas, sloped roof designs. Again, all these things keep repeating themselves through each of these different small area studies. And then Santa Fe, the South Platte River, here we start getting into things that are important as to environmental conservation and being respective to the river corridor, opening development up to that, creating more trails and soft green edges to respect that area, creating more access to the river. So that will be an important component of this as well. These will be the facilitators this evening. We are going to be breaking you out into 4 different small groups. So Kathleen will be leading a session on the economics of land use. Jennifer and Mike will be talking about the details of zoning, looking at the existing zoning and some of the standards that are there, and really how the standards contributed to what's on the ground today. Brian Mabry will be talking a session of on the ground, and here we'll be actually looking at the corridors and a map and getting people to weigh in as to helping us to identify where there are sensitive edges next to residential neighborhoods, if there are sites that are valued by the community and should be preserved and sustained. If there are other areas that you see there being opportunity for redevelopment or some other type of streetscape enhancement. And then I'm going to be facilitating one on preferences and perspectives, really looking up and down these corridors and thinking about how things have been developed, what areas are good examples, what areas could maybe be designed or developed in another manner to meet our expectations in the future. So these are the different areas and a little bit more about them. We're going to randomly assign everybody just so we have an equal number in each of the 4 sessions. So that's going to happen here momentarily. So you'll find yourself within one of these 4 breakout sessions with those facilitators. We also have note takers. We have city staff members that are going to be taking notes to help us pull together an assembly. And the first thing we're going to do is ask among those participating in our sessions for one person to volunteer to make a brief presentation for the last part of this session, or the last part of this evening, to help others understand what was discussed, debated, what the key points were, what you liked, so you can inform everybody else. Keep in mind, this is all going to be recorded. Each of these breakout sessions will be recorded. They'll also be on the project website, so you can look at them later on, and then we'll be putting out a recordation of the comments that have been received. So each will be facilitated by us, and we're going to try to spend from now until about 5:35 or so, give ourselves a little bit of time to transition, and then we'll use the last 20 minutes for these presentations, one by each group. We'll have about 5 minutes to summarize what the group discussed. Just next steps, this shows you a little bit of our schedule. So we will have another Envision Studio on December 14th, so sneaking up on us rather quickly. So we'll be pulling a lot of this information together and then coming back to you and getting confirmation that we're heading in the right direction. We'll have a council briefing on January 12th. And then at that point, we'll be starting into the next building block on neighborhoods. We'll have Envision Studios for them and then one for the business commercial district as well. So this is the project website. If you want to make note of the address here along the top.
And Brett, the address is even easier. It should read envisionlittleton.org.
There you go, even easier. So you can go to envisionlittleton.org and get to the project website that has all this information and everything that's coming up. So at this point, we'll ask Brian to assign everybody to the small groups. And as I said, you will show up in one of these groups and your facilitator will be present. So my screen went blank for a moment there. Now it looks like we're coming back together. Looks like I have looks in my session here. Okay, let me make sure that I can believe I'm still recording. Okay, can everybody give me a thumbs up that you are hearing me? Okay. And are you seeing my presentation on perspectives and preferences? Yes? Okay, very good. Well, as I said, as we're going through this, you can unmute yourself so we can have conversations here. Please feel free to jump in at any point. I see several of you are still muted, so you can, I believe you can unmute yourself, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So this is intended to be very participatory. Is there one of you who would volunteer by raising your hand that would be willing to be our spokesperson for 5 minutes at the end of this evening, just to tell everybody else what we discussed and if there were any decisions or key points that came out of our conversation here? Do I have a volunteer?
Yeah,
Okay, Susan, I appreciate that. Okay, so Susan will be basically just listening. Doesn't require you to take any notes or anything like that. Just basically summarize what we talked about as we're going through this part of the breakout. So this is intended to be a roundtable discussion. What we're trying to accomplish here is to really start dissecting these corridors and understanding what is it that creates the impression that you get along these corridors. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be neutral. But what contributes to that? So we'll be looking at your observations of the type of development. If you consider it to be quality or you would like to see more quality, and then the character of that development. Is it auto-dominated, where parking lots dominate the view and dominate the site? Or, what do you feel is what you'd like to see? Thinking about conditions, what's on the site, what's adjacent to the site, what the property is zoned and adjacent properties. And then looking at, any potentials. So other opportunities for reduced parking and infill, other types of buildings on these sites. And so hopefully tonight we'll be able to identify some sites that we think lend themselves to being mixed use.
Did you want to start with one specific corridor to make it a little more focused as we go along? Or?
Yeah, I have some aerial images of some corridors and some of the areas along the corridors that we'll be talking about. So these are the primary things when we start thinking about a corridor that we need to keep in mind. So the first is a parcel or a site or a property.
Excuse me, Brett, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not seeing your presentation, so I'm a little puzzled.
Okay, thank you for telling me that.
Okay, now I see a presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me know that. So we'll be looking at, those sites and how buildings relate to the natural environment. So areas where there are creeks and greenways, the properties that are abut or near proximity to the river, other areas, and then the relationship between buildings and the surrounding landscape. So that's one part of it. On a site, it's also thinking about the location and arrangement and orientation of buildings. So if there's more than one building on a site, how are they arranged relative to one another, relative to the street, and relative to the adjacent properties? So are they turning their back on the street, and so you see the rear of a building, or are they turning their back on, an adjacent site or even the river, or how do those buildings present themselves to the people who are passing by? In terms of the buildings, we can think about the shape of buildings. Are they just plain square boxes with flat roofs and no real visual interest? Do they start to have different shapes and forms, different roof types, with buildings creating some interesting architecture? And then where they are placed on a site. How we transition from buildings that may be on the same site or on adjacent sites. So do we have, particularly where there might be a line between single-family residential and the property adjacent to it, which might be within these corridors. How do we ensure that we are sensitive to those edges so that we're not creating or imposing on the value and integrity of those residential lots? And then the materials, colors, and textures. So, that could be everywhere from roof types, materials, building materials, if it's, masonry or some type of siding or glass or whatever that might be, and the colors and how they all work together. Access to the site will be important. How many driveways there are, if they're coordinated amongst each other and with the properties on the site, and if they're coordinated with what's across the street. The goal is to basically try to reduce the maximum number of driveway access, to use shared access and cross access, so that once you get off the main street, you don't have to go back out on the main street to go to the next site. You can just drive straight across. And then making sure that all those are provide good access for the sites. Parking is one of the dominant visual features. In addition to buildings, parking is probably the most prominent feature. And so again, it's thinking about where that's located relative to the building, how the parking lot is laid out, and how it is designed. So which way the rows go, if there are islands within the interior of the parking lot, around the perimeter of the parking lot, how it's landscaped, things of that nature. And then lastly is landscaping and where that's placed. If it's along the frontage, within the parking lot, around foundations, between buildings, landscaping can have a lot to do with the aesthetic appeal of a lot of these properties. So those are some of the things to think about with the design of these corridors. This is just going to give you kind of an image of what a mixed-use development could look like. This is just a random image. It's nothing that's been planned in Littleton. It's just something I grabbed off the internet. But instead of having a large strip shopping center that's along the back of this property and the whole front 3/4 of this lot being filled with parking, you see that in places around Littleton. You see that in places all over Denver and all over the U.S. That is kind of a common way that people have developed. And the reason that they've developed that way is because the zoning that has allowed them to develop that way. And so that's our purpose here, is to say, is that okay? Is that what we want our corridors to be? Or do we desire to have something different along our corridors? And if so, what regulations and standards have to be drafted to bring those to light? So this shows that there are different types of land uses. There are residential land uses, some that are office, some that are retail, some that are mixed use buildings. And then the parking lot is kind of broken up, so it's more convenient to those buildings and you don't have large fields of parking. So this is just kind of an example of what you could see for a mixed use development. So the first example I'm going to take is Aspen Grove. This is just illustrative, okay? I just grabbed this because it's a good example of the way it has been designed. they've done a lot of things right. This was by planned development. So they've got a nice green space along Santa Fe. They've done nice landscaping within the parking lot and along pedestrian ways leading to the buildings. They've separated the commercial from the residential with a tree buffer. So there's a lot of things. They've consolidated access. So you take one access off of Santa Fe and then move throughout the site from there. So there's a lot of components of this that have been done well. So I would just like to hear from you, first of all, thinking about these topics that I just laid out. I'm sure you visit there perhaps often, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are as to how this site appears, maybe to you as well as to maybe somebody that's first time in a town and they're driving by in Santa Fe, and how this appears to them, and if you see there being any opportunities for this being developed differently over time. Any thoughts or comments, anyone?
Well, I'd be happy to get the conversation going because Susan and I were on city council when we zoned Aspen Grove.
Perfect.
And, you know, there were lots of things that we were extraordinarily enthusiastic about that development. And the Planning Commission was key in pushing certain ideas such as the rooftops not being filled with HVAC systems and so forth.
Uh-huh.
And the council followed through with that. I think the big disappointment, and I was there just today, the big disappointment is the lack of connection and interaction with light rail, with alternative modes of transportation. And I would say now, what, 15, almost 20 years in looking back, I think it would benefit from residential, multifamily residential. I mean, the consultant for the city who you worked with, Brett, made it really clear that rooftops drive retail. And I think there are opportunities to make that whole site come even more alive.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for starting us off. I appreciate that. Who else wants to weigh in?
I'll go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
John Strong. So I used to be a police officer up until July of this year in the city of Littleton, and I've driven all of these streets several times, especially Aspen Grove. One thing of note, I would have to agree with Pat, is that I really did like the design of the buildings within the Aspen Grove area. It looks, the roofs are very nice. You can't see the AC systems. To me, it's very inviting as a building. One of the things I would note though is that the residences that are to the west of the Aspen Grove is that area is a gated community. So somebody that's coming to Littleton for the first time, they wouldn't even have a chance to drive through that area, which, you know, I agree with the gated community, but all they're going to see is the Aspen Grove and the sea of parking that we have there. They're not going to get a chance to view the nice driveways and parking ways and trees and everything that are in the apartments that are to the west of that. I also agree with the fact that it seems like it's difficult for somebody to understand that when they get off the light rail station that they have such a great shopping center so close by, because it's kind of hidden from the light rail station. Maybe if you're watching as you are riding in on the train to get to the station there, you might notice that, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like that Aspen Grove shopping center was a little bit isolated from the station itself. That's all.
Okay. Very good. Anybody else?
This is Deborah. I think the design is beautiful. The building faces being variegated as well as the rooftops. It would have been nice to see some more public spaces, green spaces within the parking lot. I'm not a traffic engineer, but for some reason, the pedestrian and vehicular interactions in this parking lot are very dangerous. Continue to be that way. I couldn't speak to it, but the connectivity, I think, could be a little bit better, not only to the light rail, but getting into the development. There's only one access off of Santa Fe, and there's another one down south off of South Platte Parkway. So the connectivity into it could be a little bit better, but for sustainability purposes and the way that communities are moving, a lot of communities are moving to a 15-minute community, meaning they can access everything they need within 15 minutes. So looking at the mix of residential surrounding retail, not necessarily on the same site, but how close they are in proximity is really relevant. The residential area to the east here can get to this area pretty easily, as well as the limited residential around it. But, just in general, looking at Littleton in general, moving to a 15-minute community, I think would be beneficial, especially with COVID becoming more prevalent. People accessing what they need immediately around them, I think is going to be a huge benefit, probably moving away from the large shopping centers like Aspen Grove and some of the surrounding areas.
Okay. In the interest of time, just to kind of keep the conversation moving, this is just, starting to help illustrate when you think about that mixed use diagram that I had, if that were to be applied to Aspen Grove, there is a lot of parking. And if you participated in the downtown, you probably recall that, and you probably just know by driving by or visiting the center that, for probably 355 days, if not more, this is mostly empty. So it's a great expense to the developer. It requires a lot of, snow moving and creates a lot of runoff and things of that nature. So if we reduce the parking, we gain areas that could be utilized for more development. If we start putting buildings on top of parking, or if you get enough development in here to warrant a parking structure, it creates opportunity to more efficiently utilize this site. And by efficiently, I mean by integrating, more residences. So as you say, you kind of build in, retail clients right there, restaurants and so forth, but also being able to capitalize in terms of the amount of leasable and taxable square footage on this site. So your zoning ordinance today on its face wouldn't allow something like this. They would have to go back through the plan development process and a revision. And instead of doing that, what we would like to do with this ULUC is to make that permitted by right in certain locations, not everywhere, obviously, but on sites like this that really lend themselves to that. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about, do you see this being feasible? Do you see it being attractive? And do you see it being wise? The other thing to think about is they have multifamily surrounding, but there's no single family low density residential other than across the highway. So we'd want to be careful in terms of height. But otherwise, what are your thoughts when you start thinking about something like this for Aspen Grove?
Brett, remind us what the colors mean.
Yeah, so the red I was just showing would be like retail. So that basically you could create a main street along the front of the buildings here by creating red. I didn't fill in everything else, just wanted to kind of show example. Pink could be office development. And then purple, I didn't color them, but being the parking areas, of course, we've kind of shut that area off in the way we've arranged buildings, but perhaps there's a way to open that back up to better integrate this site so that we have more access to rail and more visibility. And again, there's no magic to this. It was just starting to show about how we can create retail. We could create some type of attached or multifamily residential. We can have the parking kind of in the back, so parking's not quite so prominent visually. to passersby and have parking on street and things of that nature. So what are your thoughts?
If I could kick it off, so I'm actually a Littleton native, as well as a land development engineer. So I've been through several cycles of Colorado's economy. When we become really restrictive on zoning, we reduce our ability to recover and be development friendly during economic downturns. That's just a general statement. It's not talking about what you're showing here. It's something that Colorado and especially the suburbs have struggled with through economic times extensively. Being really prescribed is not development friendly and does not pull us out of economic times. So it's just something to consider, allowing flexibility, like you mentioned, use by rights, just allowing flexibility in the future will really make Littleton stronger during all times.
That's a fantastic comment. I'm glad you said that because in the regulations, we can provide for these things and make sure that they're able to be parked and make sure that we have adequate open space and make sure that we have good walkability and separating vehicular and pedestrian access, but without getting to the point of, prescribing every detail. So that's important. That's a very good point. And now is probably a great time to make that point in the middle of COVID and the impact that we've seen on retail, that these sites need to be nimble so that they can, move with the market.
I would echo what Deborah said about flexibility. I think that's really crucial. We always have to keep in mind it's about people making money, but the city relies on retail sales tax, and you've got to have the ability for your land use to serve the city financially and keep it financially healthy. And I would just point one other thing out, Brett, that the Purple site is the as you probably know, the RTD parking, and they're just the two things are so different, but they should be planned for together, I would hope, because we can't. Talk about a sea of parking there. There's got to be something that can serve the city in a much more useful way.
Yeah, and this starts to get at part of what we need to talk about, and that is here we have a very large site and one owner, one developer. But in some cases, we may have smaller sites that are owned by different people. And just because we have different ownership doesn't mean that we still can't write the regulations to require or encourage that they almost develop as one. So we kind of think about them in a master plan. So we can think about how they take access, how buildings abut one another, how those properties might share access, how they relate to one another. So even though you might have different ownerships, the sites aren't built just unto themselves, right? We're thinking about them in a broader context. So that's an example here where, and I don't know which came first, but Aspen Grove, like I said, the architecture, the buildings are done real nice. They've done a lot of things well. But relative to the RTD property, we kind of, create a divider there. So there might be opportunity in the future. Other thoughts on this?
Well, this is Susan. I certainly agree that there's so much parking there, and of course, in a time of COVID, they really don't need it. But even day to day, there's an awful lot of asphalt sitting vacant, and not just at Aspen Grove, but in many, many developments across the metro area. I think that's a key thing we have to cut back. I really do. And of course, then we on the council dropped the ball with not thinking through how connection to light rail would work. There was a lot of moving balls in that point of time. So we didn't quite know what all would come, but we might have done a better job of thinking about connectivity to light rail. And I think that should be a priority now because we now know how important that is.
Right. The other thing with all this parking is when snow melts and when we have rain and it runs off, how's that runoff going to be handled? How's it going to be treated to make sure that we're protecting water quality and protecting our resources? So it's not just about too much parking and too much expense, but there's a whole nother side to it.
I was going to actually comment on that, having done some of these designs and loving my Colorado, the Platte's right there, and the proximity to the potential for a lot of toxins getting in there is always a potential with a sea of parking. It's very easy to incorporate what they call low impact development design into parking lots to treat storm water within those areas. And it also really adds green space to any development, and is a great way to just acknowledge sustainability and the resources we have.
Yeah, that's very true. And parking lots that have low impact design can be super attractive as well, making those amenities.
I would just point out that one of the challenges Littleton has throughout the city is the development that came to us from the east, and all the paved properties and the buildings and stuff. The land that used to absorb water, now it's all pushed downhill and we are at the bottom of the watershed. So the more we can do to develop parking lots that are absorbent, and we have to plan for future flooding, and we really have, but we've got to continue that.
Okay, that's a good
I'd like
point.
to make a point. I'd like to just make a point about parking at the RTD lot at Aspen Grove. These days, it's a sea of pavement, but back in the day when people used to actually ride, light rail to work downtown, it was impossible to find a parking spot there. You had to get there by 7 o'clock in the morning to get a spot. So it really, that line is heavily utilized, and people, especially from south and west of Littleton that use the line to commute to downtown, they do drive and they need someplace to park. So I think the need for parking is a real one.
At the RTD lots.
Yes, at the RTD lots.
I don't think, Kim, anyone's talking about eliminating the need. And in fact, RTD won't allow you to eliminate the 1,400 spaces that they have there. It's all part of the environmental impact statement that was done for the Southwest line. But the parking should be accommodated in a way that is serves the community better, whether it's parking structure wrapped by retail and residential. And I think as a city, as a community, we need to be thinking about how do our residents get to access that station if they don't get there at 7 in the morning. And that means a more robust bus system that's going up and down Mineral, I think, I just think, what can we do to make it easier for our citizens to use light rail without getting up at the crack of dawn?
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that parking can be a lot more creative than what we're seeing in purple there, but there is a need for it. It's just not going away.
Right.
I think I think there's also an opportunity, if you go back to that slide, for a lot more integration with the bike and trail system, because really, especially with like COVID and a 400% increase in bike sales and just the amount that the trail's being used, there's only one entrance into Aspen Grove, and it's from that little traffic circle near the nature center. And so you're kind of pushing people into the most congested car area, like traffic area, into that corner where Panera is, the north or southwest corner. And if you had another trail entrance, maybe on the north side, you could also open that up. There, I know there's a Starbucks there, but you might be able to get more kind of cafe retail as well. Just because we have such a heavily used trail, but it becomes really inaccessible in an odd way. And I think it would also help with some of the commuter stuff that Kim was talking about as well, because it's really not for being right on the trail, it's not a bike friendly area. And that goes back to somebody's comment with the traffic throughout that parking lot area as well. There's really not accessibility for cyclists.
Okay. So to kind of keep moving here, we've got about 8 minutes. So these are, sites that we see up and down the corridors where we have individual, ownerships and individual properties that have been built over time. Some of them have been set back and have green space along the frontage, like Santa Fe Spirits here, parking to the side, access to the side. Others, like the Jazz Car Wash, just the way the building is oriented, you have all the car wash access and pavement out front. So there's a number of different ways that you see buildings have chosen. The zoning ordinance has minimum standards. And so that doesn't give you any reliability as to how sites are going to develop. It just says there's a minimum standard. And of course, they can exceed that as much as they want to. So they can move buildings back and put parking up front. So we want to be a lot more deliberate about how we want these corridors to develop. So just looking at, these parcels right here, what are your observations?
I'm thinking more about the parcels that are further south of that. There are very mixed, I shouldn't say mixed use, but uses for dog washing. There's vacuum repair. There's, I don't know, a lot of small businesses down there, very underused properties, in my opinion.
There's a lot of constraints along this area, especially along the west side. But it's, for somebody who uses it fairly frequently, it's scary, pulling into and out of some of those side streets and entrances. There's just too many access points onto a 55 mile an hour where people are going 70 miles an hour. So, some sort of more limits on access, perhaps a little bit more of a buffer between the traffic and the buildings and parking, putting the parking behind the buildings so you see the buildings first. There's a lot of things I think we could think about here.
Yeah. Okay.
Further this is a tough nut to crack because you have individual lot owners, respecting their right of use. They each get their own individual access. It is very scary to pull into those. The easiest solution in urban areas is to create a frontage road. Those are never appealing. We already have one across the street on the east side with Summit, I think it's Summit Street, looking at your presentation, but it's really tough. Having shared access points like Lake Drive onto Vinewood is ideal. You're minimizing one into each of the lots, but that's also difficult because it involves working with those property owners. Really, really tough situation.
Yeah. This is actually a good example. It's kind of an example of a reverse frontage. So rather than having the street run, parallel and along the front of Santa Fe, it's along the rear of the properties. So you have, Lake and Maplewood access off of Santa Fe, but then these other sites take access to those or from the rear. So that's, kind of a good example of utilizing a reverse frontage. That's also an example of coordinating site plan approvals and making sure that some of these things can happen as they develop or redevelop.
The other thing that occurs to me, Brett, is that the community college property is vastly underused on the east side. And I know that dealing with a state system, I mean, it'd be complicated and stuff, but if there were ways to develop there that would assist the city and also the community college, I think we should look into that.
Yeah. There could be some very nice uses that would serve well to those that are attending college there, that contribute to the city. It just depends on their master plan and what they have for this area. But that's a very good point.
I think it could benefit both, you know.
Yeah. So we've got one site here with a car wash where all your access to the car wash is right along the frontage, very limited green space. Santa Fe Spirits has a lot of green space along the frontage. It's, you know, nicely landscaped with parking and access to the side and to the rear. And then the next Platte River Bar and Grill shows yet another example of, you know, the frontage is all parking. So you kind of have three different examples of the way sites are built. So if I were to guess.
Brett, if I could just add, I think, you know, one thing the Platte River Bar and Grill's done a really nice job with is connecting with the Mary Carter Greenway. And I think whatever happens, I mean, we think in terms of access and all of that, and if in the future there's some kind of overlay that's for this area, we have to think in terms of it also connecting to the west, and to Lauren's points about bicycling and the trail uses and all of that, and to look at it holistically. And I like what Susan talks about Valrapo Community College. I think there are lots of opportunities there. I mean, talk about a sea of parking. Oh my God.
Yeah. That was brought up during downtown too.
Yeah.
Being on the South Fringe.
And by the way, you don't really want to take on Platte River Bar and Grill because they're amazingly popular.
No, that's awesome. And the point here is not to pick on any particular use. It's just kind of look at alternatives of how things have been laid out. And going forward, you know, how do we want to lay things out? The thing that we see here is, and this is common in, you know, communities all over, that all these sites kind of back up to the trail and to the river. And there is some vegetation here, but otherwise, you know, the fact that the Platte River Bar and Grills provided a connection to the trail, there's a lot more opportunity for that when properties develop in this type of environment.
There's a coffee shop that's along the trail at the backside of Hudson Gardens. And I think that's pretty inviting. That kind of goes right along with what Susan is saying. And a couple times I've ridden my bike to there, and I've also ridden up into the Platte River Bar and Grill. So I think that some kind of access from the trail, or at least some kind of way to get to some of these business when we're redeveloping, would be a good idea. The other thing I'm thinking about is the parking lot that is right there at Church Street and Prince Street. That's on the ACC property. I've always thought that, especially since the railroad kind of rises up above and the parking lot kind of dips down, that would be a really good spot for a multi-layered parking. Maybe there could be some kind of a joint effort between the college and the city to create some more parking for downtown, because Lord knows we need that parking for downtown.
Right. Let me jump ahead here real quick. We've got actually we pretty much have no time. Just real quickly, we see a lot of the same types of thing here. Thing that I notice along Bellevue is all these businesses at front here. They do have a nice, green in front. So even though we have parking, you know, they're pretty attractively done. These are, you know, a series of properties have kind of developed individually over time and then kind of tied together. But a lot of the same things we've already talked about, you know, how it relates to the greenway, large parking lots, better utilization, thinking about bike-friendly, ped-friendly. Any quick observations on this that's different than what we've talked about?
From me, one thing real quick as a police officer, right there where the TCF Bank is and the McDonald's, there was an accident that occurred that I was a part of, and the cars kind of rolled up onto the greenway. And I think one of the things that helps a lot that we don't realize from a safety standpoint is that creates a barrier for people that are in the parking lot walking through or parking to be safe from some of these things that happen on these roadways, because we have quite a few accidents in the city and they end up going off the road a lot. So
If I could just add to that, I'm a big proponent of detached sidewalks for that reason, with trees between the sidewalk and the curb.
Yes.
And Bellevue would be a great location for something like that.
Well,
I'll echo that as well.
one of our most dangerous sidewalks is the one on Alamo, the Alamo Bridge going into downtown. I mean, talk about feeling unsafe. There's a bit of an incline, and having walked it many times to go to light rail down Littleton Boulevard, if it's icy, I mean, you are taking your life in your hands as a pedestrian.
Just one comment from, again, an engineer standpoint, bringing the green space interior to the parking makes it seem like less of a sea of parking. People love to have the shade of trees to park underneath. And again, you can treat your water quality with interior to the site. It just has so many opportunities to solve so many problems. I'll echo the detached of both John and Craig. That's a huge safety. It's so easy and it beautifies the street front as well. To capitalize on what John was saying, I find that very few agencies actually reach out to their police departments to get input like this. I would suggest that it's such an easy way to make our community safer.
I would agree with that. Thanks.
So Deborah's just reinforced the importance of landscaping, especially trees, to separate people from traffic, to make a place where people want to park, where people feel good, feel comfortable.
Yep.
Back several years ago, we had this acronym CPTED. It was Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, and it was a lot about lighting and turning on the sprinklers so that the homeless people aren't there overnight, or different things like that. And this would be a really good place to integrate, traffic, pedestrian traffic safety. Maybe we can integrate that with the street designs and having trees and rocks or fences or whatever buffer the streets from where pedestrians are walking. I totally agree with walking along Prince Street there. It scares me even when I'm driving for some of the people that are walking along the sidewalk there.
Yeah, the sidewalk's right at the back of the curb, more or less.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would have been much better if the fencing would have been along the street and the sidewalk was on the other side, keeping the cars away from the pedestrians. I'm sure, especially having all the blind people that walk up and down that street, if we didn't have to worry about them wandering into the roadway, then I would feel a lot better about that area specifically.
So John, you're thinking that all our design standards should try to move the sidewalks away from being immediately adjacent to the street.
Well, I agree with Craig when he's talking about putting some kind of a buffer from the street, from the pedestrians. I mean, I think traditional design, we have never done that. I mean, you can look in all the neighborhoods around the state or other states, and most of the sidewalks are right on the streets. And not sure why that was designed. I used to live on Curtis Street, and there back in the day, Gardenier had planted a bunch of trees, and there was a buffer between the street and the sidewalk. And there were two great big cottonwood trees in between, in front of every house. And I think people feel a lot more safe walking down a street like that with some kind of a buffer, as opposed to being right on the sidewalk. I don't know. When I go up to a corner, I always stand back because I know that accidents happen. I've seen them all the time. I can't believe all the people that stand right on the edge of the curb waiting for their turn to walk and just no clue about how dangerous it might be if someone's watching their phone or something when a car comes through there.
It's only in recent years that more attention has been given to pedestrians. Most of the time our roads were designed to be enjoyed from the car. And so sidewalk was sort of an afterthought. And if you look at even the attention given to medians, well, that's, you enjoy that from the car, as opposed to walking and being under the shade of a tree, or to be protected from the splashing that goes on with the cars after a snowstorm or whatever.
And to retrofit these streets, you can't take property away from the adjacent landowners, but I don't think we should be afraid to look at narrowing the streets.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. That's what we did on Littleton Boulevard.
Yeah.
I also think there's a huge opportunity at Santa Fe and Prince, the intersection there, because you're connecting the Arapahoe County building, Littleton City building, and then also all of that 5141 housing that otherwise doesn't really have a safe crossing. I mean, Prince is kind of the least trafficked,
Yeah.
but especially to get over to the, it's really, unless you go all the way down to Little's Creek, it's the only crossing. It seems like the safest crossing to do as a pedestrian or as a cyclist, not to become like the bike lady on this call, but
It's a good cause.
it cuts off a really, it cuts off that whole area from being just accessible not from a car.
So I believe we need to leave the breakout room to join reconvene the other session. So let me leave the breakout room here, then we'll be all back in the main session, I believe.
I am not on Zoom. I'm just using my phone. I pressed *6 to unmute and got kicked out to the main session. Is there a way I can go back to my little session and make my comments?
The sessions are, Brett, you're mute. The sessions are just now ending, and we're all coming back now to the main room, the main virtual room.
I understand that. Like I say, I was just trying to add my comment to my small group, but the unmute took me back to you for some reason.
Huh.
I'm taking your answer to mean you don't know how to get me back to my small session.
The small sessions have been ended.
They're ending in 10 seconds.
Yeah, but please feel free to relay your comments on to Jennifer or Kathleen so we can pick those up. We don't want to miss them at all.
Okay.
Okay, so in the time remaining, each of the groups had someone that had volunteered to speak. So for each of those groups, can we have those folks get back to where we were here?
Brett, this is Kathleen. I will say for our breakout group, we were just on a roll. I don't know if everyone else's time flew by, but we did identify, so we're happy to go first. John
Great.
Brady in our group did take some notes. I think we were just getting to the meat of our conversation, so I'll turn it over to John. I'm not sure if I see him on, oh, there he is. Yep.
Hey. Thanks, Kathleen. Well, actually, I did not take good notes. I was losing track of time too. I feel like by the time we got through the introduction and some of your slides, we were just sort of getting into the forming stage of the group, and it would have been nice to have more time to really flesh out some of those ideas there at the end. But my takeaway from the session, Kathleen, you did a great job, I thought. Going through the history of what this is all about. And it will qualify to everybody. I'm new to Colorado. I've been here six months, and my interest in the group is I live in Littleton now, and I'm planning to move down to the downtown area in a couple of months. So I just want to be involved as much as I can. But so we talked about the economics and went over some general definitions of what the what is mixed use? What does that mean? What does it mean to the development of the corridor areas? What currently exists? We looked at a nice chart that showed the tax, the sales and use tax revenue, different sections of the Littleton area, that was an interesting look. And then I think, at the end we got into what does it mean, like what's significant? What are the different features or factors that makes an area significant? I think I actually did take one note because I thought we had more time. But it was the susceptibility to change. And I think that's sort of, and then somebody brought up, what is mixed use? What do we mean by that? Most people know what urban means. They know what suburban means. But what is mixed use? You could really define that in a lot of different ways. I will say, my observation of the downtown, but really kind of all over this area, it's super eclectic where you have, historically it was probably a lot of residential, older, smaller homes, but then over time, commercial came in and sort of overtook it. So, my general question to everybody is what really is the goal of this? Because when I see a sales and use tax map, the city can't survive without tax revenue. It can't be, the government can't survive. You need money to govern, right? But the only way to get there is people got to buy stuff, and there has to be businesses located within those zip codes. And so I was just sort of thinking, I know that this effort started well before COVID-19, but there's been studies showing that since COVID, there's been sort of a mass exodus out of the urban areas, right? Everybody's been working virtually for the last 6-7 months, and they're proving that you can do that. You don't actually have to drive into the city to go to an office. You can stay at your home. So why would you want to live there? You go buy a house out in the suburbs. And I know I'm getting way off track here, but I think
way off track.
Yeah, thank you, sir. But I'm putting that point out there because I think that's important in terms of if you're defining this stuff. Think about it. This plan was based on legacy logic that was only a year and a half ago.
Right.
So if you're building something for the future, I think you have to take the current dynamics of the situation into your thought process. So I'll end it there.
Thanks, John. The spokesperson for the on the ground or in the details with Kathleen. Brian, you might prepare to see if you can bring up the map. Okay. Like maybe you're doing that. So that's good. So spokesperson.
Take it away, Bob.
Oh, we're on?
There you go.
Okay. Yes, we talked about the zoning and corridors and what is it? And it's something to protect the property rights and the public good, and it's protecting against uncertainty. We talked about some of the current zoning misses, and they're like developer incentives and neighborhood protections and the need for character elements. Then we went and we started looking at some specific uses, what B2 actually looked like and how it interacted, transitional, how that worked. One of the comments that came up consistently was we were talking about buildings along Littleton Boulevard, and it seems that people think that the buildings should be closer to the street, that makes it much more pedestrian friendly and it makes it more inviting, makes the street feel safer, which brought up the issue with transitional zoning. Transitional zoning is a large part of what's along Littleton Boulevard there, and it has the same setbacks as residential does, which is a minimum of 20-foot setback in the front. There was some conversation that should probably be changed so the buildings could come closer to the street and people could interact with them better. So there was also some concern that perhaps the parking requirements were too strong in the B2 district, that we were providing more parking than we needed to arbitrarily. Then we started looking at the different corridors and what we thought of them. Along the Santa Fe corridor, we determined that an awful lot of these buildings are turning their back to Santa Fe. They're not very inviting when you drive through. However, there's a lot of different issues there that have to be dealt with. There was some thought kicked around to some sort of a frontage road quite a ways away, more of like a backage road maybe, to connect those developments from Aspen Grove all the way up to Flat River Bar. Then we looked at Bellevue, and that has the highest density for B3 there, and there was some talk that there wasn't much consistency there, and we weren't really sure what the intention was and what could be done, so that should probably be clarified. Then we looked at, there was a question raised by our moderator, should the corridors have a consistent look? And that got a lot of feedback there. The determination was that Santa Fe is a state highway and it's going to have its own flavor. There's no way we could impose, probably even should think about imposing some sort of Littleton flavor on that. Then so we're down to Littleton Boulevard, Broadway, and Bellevue. The thought is that Littleton Boulevard is unique against those, and we would like to keep it unique. There was some conversation about perhaps some different design nodes as we come down there, something that would attract people and get them off the street and doing some shopping there. And then we also talked about Broadway, and there was some conversation. It'd be nice to have something other than just car stores all along there. And there was also some discussion about the residential, single-family houses on Littleton Boulevard and Broadway, and how that didn't seem consistent with the corridors. That's about it.
That's great. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. You see, Ryan, your group with on-the-ground observations. Are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen, and maybe Karen has a minute or so to recap what we talked about.
Sure thing. So we took a look at this map that is on the screen, and Brian instructed us to basically drop a pin on the areas of town that had either an interest in preservation, an area of transition, an area of opportunity, or any notable areas. So us as a group went through individually and marked the areas on the map that we thought personally had one of those few categories. Of note, there was a lot of discussion about Littleton Boulevard and the importance of maintaining some of the history and heritage of the houses, even though they were marked as a potential opportunity along Littleton Boulevard. Closer to Broadway and Littleton Boulevard marked as some significant opportunity with either old dilapidated buildings that that could use some basically tear down and build back up, along with some extensive empty parking lots that are just sitting there. Part of this was, a lot of people want to live and work in and around downtown Littleton, and utilizing the bus service to bring people up and down Littleton Boulevard would help that situation. Other comments about how basically that Littleton Boulevard is just ripe for, any sort of development, since it's already likely zoned for that, but making sure some of the preservation is still there. Moving closer to the west, there were some comments about utilizing Main Street as a single lane of traffic and putting in a bike lane, so that would help alleviate some car traffic and making it more bike friendly. The area just over Santa Fe, moving into Bowles, the potential of extending Main Street there and creating a more of a downtown type area in those open lots. And then trying to gentrify down Santa Fe a little bit, potentially right in front of Hudson Gardens, adding some retail and or restaurants that would help benefit Hudson Gardens without taking away from what they're doing, maybe adding some business for them. And then just working our way down to Santa Fe with some opportunities and, while certainly not trying to take every square inch of potential land and turning it into retail or housing, but there are some places that would make sense. The West Mineral train station, which I know has been, up for discussion. There's certainly room for a parking garage and retail there, and then, across the street as well.
Okay, thank you, Karen, very much. We've got about 4 minutes left, so we're tracking along pretty well here. Perspectives and preferences. Susan? I believe you're on mute, Susan. Susan, are you on mute? You have to click off the mute button.
What Susan are you talking to?
Horton?
Susan Thornton. There you go. So there were 2 former mayors in our group, so there was lots of talking and conversation. We first focused on Aspen Grove, feeling that we had lost a bit of an opportunity, or quite a bit of an opportunity, in the connectivity or lack thereof with light rail, especially. And we need more bus stops to drive retail there. Let's see. Although there was thought that the design of the buildings was inviting, the residences to the west of the Aspen Grove was a gated community, and so what they basically see is parking when they come in, a sea of parking. They felt that the area needs more parking, public spaces, and needs more flexibility in terms of design for parks, for walkability. The city, of course, relies on retail sales taxes, and so we got to try to keep Aspen Grove healthy. The south areas of concern, it should really be planned with Aspen Grove as a unit. It's now looking like housing, even different owner, of course. But one person in our group felt we really got to do something about the parking at the RTD lot for light rail, because Littleton residents can't get in there if they don't get there before 7 a.m. because people from the south are using it. And really, there ought to be an opportunity for Littleton residents to use it as well. Let's see. There's only one entrance to Aspen Grove for people arriving from the river on the bikes, which I hadn't really thought through. It's near Panera. And we need more entrances, including one on the north side. Then we talked about South Santa Fe corridor. One of our people said it's scary to enter a lot of the businesses on the west side because the traffic is moving so fast. Maybe we need better buffers or between parking lots and South Santa Fe. Maybe we need shared entryways. And in particular, ACC is seen as an opportunity for development because there's huge open grassy space there and a small road. There could be a development there that is beneficial for the city and for the community college system as well. There was a comment about nice features along Platte River Park Bar and Grill, where they've developed a lot of connectivity in the back to the river, and the coffee shop in particular in the Mary Carter Greenway was mentioned that I believe is part of South Suburban Park and Recreation. So those are some of the things we focused on. If anybody else has comments or I got it wrong, please jump in.
Yeah, we've right at 6 o'clock. So we know that this probably could have gone on for 3 or 4 hours because we could have had a lot of time for discussion. Unfortunately, trying to keep it concise. We'll have more opportunities as this project unfolds, so stick with us on that. We appreciate all of you weighing in. Please know that these were recorded. They'll be posted to the Envision site that we talked about earlier. We'll also be trying to do some brief narrative summaries as well, so you can watch the videos from the other sessions as well as to read the notes and see what everybody talked about. I think you'll start to see some common themes emerging that we'll be working into the Unified Land Use Code. Kathleen, was there anything that you wanted to say to close the evening?
Not just the thanks again for everyone's time. We are trying to keep these somewhat manageable in the 90 minutes, which we would love more time for conversation, but we appreciate everyone sticking it out for the 90 minutes this evening. And then I would just like to make another plug. We'll be talking corridors again in a little over a month on December 14th. So please look for that registration. Please come back and join us. In many ways, this is sort of the 101 to the conversation, and we look forward to building on it with both yourselves and hopefully others that can join us as well. So thank you so much for being here this evening, and thanks for all you do to make Littleton such a great city.
Everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.